Hi everyone, Mia here from Resonance Astrology and welcome to my channel. Today I thought we could take a deeper dive and look into Mars retrograde in Cancer. Mars has just retrograded back into the Cancer. It first started its retrograde in Leo, but now it came back to Cancer, and we're gonna have a whole long while with few months again, because Mars is gonna, once it stations direct, it's still gonna be in Cancer. So until end of April, we're pretty much gonna have to deal with Mars in Cancer again. And this is super important because Mars is said to be in its fall in the sign of Cancer. So it's not really a good position for Mars to be in. And it's often also the reason why we associate such things as anger, frustrations, passive aggressiveness to Mars in Cancer in general, because it doesn't do so well there. And I kind of just wanted to take a deeper look today, especially with the subject of anger, because I think it's something that a lot of us have a problem dealing with and expressing anger in a constructive way instead of a destructive way. And I think anger just has so many facets to reveal itself, and I just thought it would be interesting to take a bit of a deeper look and a deeper dive into anger itself today as a whole topic and as a subject. But first, let's talk a bit more about the whole dignity scheme and why, Mars is in fall in the sign of Cancer. So Mars and the moon generally have an interesting association with each other, because the moon is the home sign of Cancer, and then the other sign, Scorpio, that is ruled by Mars, well, the moon is in its fall in the sign of Scorpio. So both of these planets don't really do well in their respective signs. So there's just this connection of Mars and the moon not really doing so well together, because the moon is much more flowy and adaptable, and Mars is much more assertive and progressive and wants to do things in that sense. So also, bear with me, I have some notes here. I'm sometimes going to look a bit on my laptop just to make sure I say everything that I want to say. So the principle of Mars itself is kind of linked very much to courage and the development of will. It kind of really is the warrior planet of heading out and fighting your battles. And then when it's retrograde, Mars is more hesitant to do these things that Mars naturally does. It doesn't do so well with asserting itself and making demands, and can be very passive. So, and anger oftentimes is more internalized than externalized. And this is also something that in birth charts sometimes we can see, not just with Mars in Cancer, but if someone has a natal Mars retrograde in general, there could be a more internalized version of directing that anger. So not such an outward expression, more of this internal rage that goes inside that might not be so visible from the outside world. And now I'm not saying that one is better or one is less better. I think there's just more functional and more dysfunctional ways of how we can express anger, because I'm also not really somebody that likes to express anger so much in an outwardly sense. But I have found skills along the way over the years where I am, first of all, comfortable in feeling my own anger and just accepting that I have it inside and not let it consume me and go against me, but rather to use it as some sort of fuel. And I think that's kind of the distinction. Some people are just more outwardly, and that's totally fine. But we all need to just find ways how we can express our anger. And one important thing of how we can start to do that is to learn what anger is kind of really showing us in our lives. But to just briefly go back to the whole Moon Mars thing again, if we think of Cancer, the sign of the moon, and Mars there's something very bloody going on inside, like with our emotions and our senses, since the moon rules over our emotions and our senses. And when I think of, and this is also what I often think of when I think of the moon in Scorpio, which is, fixed water, why does the moon not do well in a watery sign? Well, because it's fixed, right? And if I think of fixed emotions, what are fixed emotions that are hard to go through the body? Well, it's grief, it's anger, it's depression, it's all of these things. That's more of a moon in Scorpio signature, but we can apply similar themes to Mars. And oftentimes, anger that is not expressed, which is something that Mars in Cancer has a hard time dealing with, because it's much rather it wants to connect and fuse things together rather than cut things off. It's unexpressed anger can become resentment in the long run, and then often resentment becomes somewhat of like a passive aggressive way of expressing ourselves. And this is kind of why this passive aggressiveness is associated with Mars in Cancer. So I want to start off by a quote of James Hollis, and he says, "If grief is pushed underground produces depression, so does anger denied. Anger is a legitimate and reflexive reaction to the organism to wounding." I think that is so important to note, because oftentimes, especially when we think of depression, we think of, depression means feeling nothing, but really depression is feeling everything so much that the body shuts down and we are overwhelmed. So we feel like we feel nothing when really we are feeling so much. And one of the biggest things in depression is always, or one way to get out of depression is to find what is this unexpressed or repressed anger that is inside. And this can be so challenging, right? Because depression is kind of like a stasis. It's so immovable, and that's also kind of what Mars retrograde feels like, right? Like when the warrior planet cannot be assertive, it goes into a stasis. And this is why Mars retrogrades in general, but especially Mars retrogrades in the sign of its fall, can lead to feelings of feeling depressed, because everything feels so static. And I also thought it was interesting because I searched up the etymology of the word frustration, which is a big word associated with Mars retrogrades in general. And the etymology is the feeling of being upset or annoyed as a result of being unable to change or achieve something. And this is like what do people that have a depression feel like all the time? Like they're unable to change or achieve something. So they land in this paralysis of not feeling like they can do something. And the first thing, like one of the most important things that we can do to get out of this, even if we're not yet expressing anger, is to just bring movement, to just move our body, to bring something that brings more energy into our lives again, and into you could say the cells in our body that have felt so static for a long time. And there's also this like correlation if we think of the crab, like the sign of Cancer is associated with the crab. Crabs have shells they like to retreat to. They need this shield and shutting down is a big protection for people that have a lot of Cancer placements, and especially for Mars in Cancer. Like that's how they protect themselves. They retreat back into their shield. They're shut down. They avoid conflict because they think this is a good solution. I'm not saying it's like the worst coping mechanism. It can definitely be helpful, like first retreating can be super beneficial if things are too overwhelming or too much. But one thing that Mars in Cancer struggles with is then, coming back out and facing facing that conflict. That is something Mars in Cancer has a very hard time to doing, and that we as a collective are probably feeling right now, or dealing with this type of energy, because Mars is back retrograde in Cancer. And oftentimes it's because there is a lot of shame around feeling the way we are feeling. Because anger for so many people is a very shameful emotion. I would say even a bit more for women. For men, in a different way. For men, sadly, it's in a way of like, oh, anger is like the appropriate response, so to say. But so often behind anger, there is a deep grief. And there's so many times where I have also realized in myself, when I was expressing my anger, after a while, when I let it out, I start to cry, because there's a part inside of me that just feels so much shame and so much frustration. And it's actually a part that really has a lot of love. I mean, technically the part that has the real anger response within us is the part that knows that we have been mistreated, or that something has not, that our boundaries have been crossed. I mean, anger really reveals where our boundaries have been crossed. So it's so important to have that response, because it can give us insight into, hey, where could have I asserted my boundaries better? Or where did somebody potentially cross my boundary, so to say? And so if we look closely and start to befriend anger and that part of ourselves, this is what we can learn. We can learn to set better boundaries, because then this becomes the protective shield of Cancer. And this is like the empowered empath, so to say, where it's like, I don't need to retreat because everything is so triggering and I can't deal with it. I'm overwhelmed. No, I'm empowered enough to be able to set boundaries. And boundaries are not, walls, which Mars in Cancer can often conflate. It's like, oh, I'm just going to build up walls. I'm going to avoid everything and everyone so that I cannot get triggered in the first place. And it's like, okay, that's good, but it's not really like going to get us anywhere in the long run. Setting boundaries is where you stand up for yourself and you remove yourself from a situation if it's too much. And for that, we need the capacity to, first of all, unshame ourselves for needing the space, and also be assertive enough to stand up for ourselves when things are too much and to walk away. Okay, so boundaries are not about what other people can or cannot do. It's what we can or can't do, and accept this and stand up for ourselves. And I think that is a very, very important distinction, and also something that I really had to learn a lot over the past few years. Now I want to talk about, it's a bit of a story time, but it's also just generally talking about like the importance of anger, but it's going to be linked with a bit of a story time, because I don't know, like almost 3 years ago now, I think, I went to this anger workshop, and it was honestly so good. Like, I didn't expect it to be so good and so liberating, but yeah, we're gonna get into it. Let me just take a sip of water. Okay, so let's go over the first principle that I briefly already touched upon a bit before, and that is that anger reveals boundaries. And this is like so important. I think people really underestimate that fact, that when we feel angry, it kind of is just a question of like, okay, something in us feels injustice has been done, like somebody maybe was too close to us, something happened too fast, or we did something too fast, we crossed our own boundaries. And it's often, it's like in little things, like you get back home and you're like so frustrated, you don't even know why. It's like, yeah, maybe because somebody stepped over your boundaries and you don't fully know yet, because it's so it's so sensitive, Just yesterday, I was in body therapy, and like to establish some sort of trust. The first time I went there, it was not yesterday that I went there for the first time, but like the first session we ever had, it was so important to establish this like closeness and distance relation. And this is actually also what we did in the anger workshop. Like, it was the very first task that we did. It was like some of the other people in the course, it was like 2-on-2, or sorry, 1-on-1, so to say. But basically somebody was standing and we had to let the other person walk towards us. And when it was too much, we would have to say stop. And that was like the first round. And then in the second round, it got a bit more tricky because it was like, okay, the other person like should only stop when they really feel like we are saying stop and meaning it with our full body. Because just saying stop and like really embodying like stop, like don't come closer, are two different things. And it can really be felt in our energetic field, so to say. So, and with so many people, like even when I did the exercise and the others, it was so fascinating that my distance and closeness ratio was so far away. And then I was just thinking like, well, damn, like every time I just even go on the bus or I'm at the shopping center, so many people are way closer to me than I would like them to be. And that's probably why, you know, going to a supermarket potentially can be so dysregulating, because so many people are so much closer than I would like them to be. And just honoring that space, like just being like, hey, like that's close enough. Just like honoring that for a moment can already feel so liberating. And you can honestly do this exercise with everyone. I mean, because it's also gonna show different results. For example, when you maybe do it with like your friends or family members or people you love, it's obviously going to be much closer and you're probably going to feel more comfortable. But it all depends on experiences, and it can also change over time. Okay, like the closeness distance ratio can also change over time and in different life phases of how much close you feel comfortable with around other people, or how much distance you want from other people. This can really be something that fluctuates over your life. It's not something that is like just fixed and stays the same. Especially, you know, after difficult experiences, often the closeness and distance ratio is something that drastically expands or shrinks. So that's just, I think, important to keep in mind and consider. And yeah, also in body therapy, it really helped me. Like I didn't think it would help so much, but just establishing that closeness distance ratio made me feel so safe from the first session on with the other person, which I think often in like just talk therapy, it is usually not something that happens. But in body therapy, that was like the first thing we did, and it was like the most important step of just establishing like, hey, how this, and what was also very interesting, we did this 2 times. One time my therapist was changing her locations and I was standing still, and the other time she was sitting somewhere and I was changing my locations and getting closer, more distant to her. And now that changed a lot of things, because, and I think this is important also because this is what Mars retrograde and Mars in Cancer can often feel like. Like they just have to let things, you know, go over them, and just like endure and let things befall them. And it's like, no, like when she was sitting and I was able to move around, it's like I'm taking back my power. Like I can choose the closeness and the distance. That felt so different. So yeah, like such a simple exercise, but so impactful. And again, something you can very much also do with people you already know, but even more interesting with strangers, right? Then there's another anger principle which is good to know. And that is that anger inspires action. When we are angry, there is a spark, within us. I mean, it's no coincidence that anger is associated with the element of fire. So anger so often feels like some sort of spark or fire inside of us. And often when we are angry, it shows us which part of us needs more love. Or often when we're I wouldn't group jealousy and anger into the same category. They're not the same feelings. But sometimes when we are angry or jealous towards another person, it's not necessarily that there's something wrong with us. It just reveals to us the information that, oh, maybe what the other person has is something that I want for myself, but I feel angry and frustrated because I don't really know how to get there. So, But there's two ways we can go about this, right? Because either we can just shut down and feel like, ugh, I'm never going to get this, like, whatever, I'm just going to stay angry and frustrated that everyone has a better life than me and I just can't do things. Or we can let it serve as an inspiration and be like, okay, so it really frustrates me that this person has this and I would really like to have this lifestyle, this I don't know, dress, this relationship or whatever. Okay, how can I start heading towards that direction? And this is really where anger, can help us, because Aries and Scorpio are both Mars ruled signs. But let's get more into Aries right now, because I think it will serve as a better metaphor for what I'm trying to say. So because Aries is like the first sign of the zodiac, and it's like this initial rebirth, that spark, that fire, that we can really see this in nature in the northern hemisphere. I'm sorry, I'm totally butchering that word, where spring is coming. And like the seedlings, like this is just like, it's such a tremendous power of like sprouting outside. And it's every year I'm so fascinated when I'm planting my seedlings. Like just that initial, like it's just so fascinating to me. But it needs so much power to do that. And then like a whole big plant can grow out of it. That's crazy. And that's kind of what Aries is that young spring sign that has that spark. It's in the present moment, and it just needs that spark to head out and to do the things. The downside of Aries is that it's a bit naive, and that sometimes it doesn't, pick its battles wisely. And that's kind of the lesson that Aries often needs to learn, like which battles should I fight and which mountains should I climb, because not every battle and not every mountain is worth fighting or climbing. But I think this just serves as a great reminder, because every time when there's a planet that is in fall doing something in the sky, it's the best that we look at, okay, well, where is Mars doing well? So we can look at the home signs, and we can also look at the sign of exaltation. Mars is exalted in the sign of Capricorn. It's the sign opposite of Cancer, where Mars does extremely well. And this can kind of give us insight into, okay, what do we kind of need to be able to go through this time that is a bit harsher. And Mars in Capricorn is okay, why is Mars doing so well in a sign of Capricorn? Well, once again, we can do the natural aspect of it, which is if we look at the northern hemisphere, Capricorn is the sign that rules over the winter solstice. It's the beginning of winter, and it's when the sun starts to get brighter again, but it's still very much dark outside. So we need and like, I guess in ancient times you could say it's like when the people had the most dire circumstances. So depending on how well you were prepping and preserving things, Capricorn season was really the like, are we going to make it through winter, or are we not going to make it through winter? So Mars is like a super good long-term planet, because it's like Mars and Saturn do extremely well in the sign of Capricorn. So it's all about the long-term plan of like fighting the battles very concisely and very wisely. It's really about like the long game and the long run, and it's kind of the opposite in the sign of Cancer, where first of all, you know, Mars in Cancer shies away from fighting in the first place. It likes to fight more with emotions and sometimes even manipulation, like manipulating things of, you know, making you feel pity for them, stuff like that. But Mars in Capricorn, where it's exalted, it's really of like, let me plan very wisely and carefully so that I have a long-term plan and goal on how I'm going to fight my battles until I'm like 50, and plan super well, rationalize super well. So this is kind of what we can learn, or what the learning curve can be when Mars is retrograde in Cancer. We can focus on, okay, what is this gonna provide for me long term? Like the actions that I'm taking or currently not taking, what does that mean? Because it's not like your choices are wrong, so to say, but it's just worth thinking of which choice is going to lead me down which path. Not taking action is going to lead me down a certain path. Taking action is also going to lead me down a certain path. And which path seems better in the long run? And it's like really like think long run. Because often when we are in paralysis, I'm just thinking of like, if you have a hard time struggling with paralysis, or you're not saying things to people that you really mean, like you're keeping your frustrations inside and you're getting resentful, and now you feel like it's too late, where it's like, is it? Like, even if 5 years passed, you're resentful to a person, you can, if it makes you feel better, more at peace, you can send an apology, you can express how you're feeling. So, and then just put yourself in that scenario. You can go really like, I sometimes do that. You're like in an old people's home or retirement home, and you're like, you know, thinking back to your life. Do you want to be that person that is like, ooh, I stayed resentful at X, Y, and Z for the 50 years of my life and I never resolved this issue? Is that the story you want to share? Or is the story you want to share, oh yeah, I'm so like, you know, I shared how I truly felt, and this is the actions that I took, and it was a bit uncomfortable, but you know, I was courageous. So this is something to maybe ponder and think about. Yeah, and I also like the quote of Anais Nin, which is, you know, life expands or shrinks at the proportion of our own courage. I'm not sure if she said it exactly like that, but I know it's something like that. So yeah, Mars in Cancer is often about kind of gauging how much... like, how should I say this? Basically, because you don't have to like throw yourself off the cliff and be like, ooh, I need to resolve everything now and fight all the battles, blah, blah. No, it's gauging constantly between like, how much am I retrieving within my shell and being, you know, home safe, because this can also be, you know, not comfortable at first, like really taking care of yourself, and how much am I, you know, retrieving out of my shell and facing the outside world, because, you know, at the end of the day, crabs have claws. they have instruments to protect themselves, so it's not like they can't fight battles, so to say. They just need to be very wise about it and aim for a good moment, so to say. And then I also want to touch on the last principle, which is anger heals trauma. Expressing our anger in a safe environment and safe container can be so extremely healing. And there's parts of you that, like, there's definitely ways where it's very responsible to express your anger privately, just, with you at home. People don't have to see it. But it can also be super healing if you are witnessed by other people. And that's, for example, something that happened in the anger workshop as like the last task, so to say, that we had, that we could do. We also didn't have to. I did it. It was very crazy and liberating at the same time. It's obviously also, but like, we had a house and it was almost like in the middle of nowhere. So yeah, because letting out anger, in a container it is kind of violent, and we have to create that space where momentarily this violence is allowed, because then anger can transform itself. And the teacher of the course, or the mentor, so to say, she basically brought a mattress and like a wooden staff, is that how you say it? And then the point was to really like express the anger we have inside, and hit and it was really hard, because when I did it, and the other people as well, it was like the anger came, but then I was also starting to cry, and then there was anger and I was starting to cry, and she was really trying to put us in that place of staying in that anger, because while it's great if anger reveals deeper layers of grief, the point was to experience anger in our nervous system as a positive influence and a positive thing, so that we can be like, oh yeah, like that's the power within me that I have, and it's not so threatening. I can be in it without it consuming me or doing something dangerous. Because I think often anger can feel very threatening. Especially because when you're repressing, it's all in your head, and this is where all these grotesque and harsh thoughts are created, or even expressed through very violent dreams and things we are then ending up having. So it's really important to have such a container, and even just being witnessed, by the other people that were in the course. Because at the end, I was basically standing there, and people were not like downright clapping for me, but essentially just being like, "Thank you for expressing this. Like, thank you for letting me witness you like this." And I think that's important. That's definitely an important step. And this is where anger can really heal trauma, because trauma is often linked with a lot of injustices that have been done to us, by us, things that happened too fast, things that most definitely crossed our boundaries, and we didn't know at that time that it was crossing our boundaries. And and then realizing that can make oneself really, really angry, and just having a place where we can express that self and let out this angry thoughts and frustration can be so liberating and so healing. And then engage in this alchemical process of transforming that anger that is stuck, or that has been stuck for a long time, into something that inspires action. And this is where we want to head with Mars retrograde in Cancer. And now, to end this whole talk, I want to read a quote of Mark Nepo, which I think kind of summarizes everything very beautifully and just serves as a nice reminder. "We waste so much energy trying to cover up who we are, when beneath every attitude is the want to be loved, and beneath every anger is a wound to be healed, and beneath every sadness is the fear that there will not be enough time. When we hesitate in being direct, we unknowingly slip something on, some added layer of protection that keeps us from feeling the world. And often that thin covering is the beginning of a loneliness which, if not put down, diminishes our chances of joy. It's like wearing gloves every time we touch something and then forgetting we choose to put them on. We complain that nothing feels quite real. Our challenge each day is not to get dressed to face the world, but to unglove ourselves so that the doorknob feels cold and the car handle feels wet and the kiss goodbye feels like the lips of another being. Soft and unpredictable. Oh, sorry, it's unrepeatable at the end. So thanks for sticking around. Let me know your thoughts. Leave a like and a share if you found this video useful. Let me know how you have been doing during the Mars retrograde, how it's affecting your chart. I would be super interesting to hear read your comments. And if you want to stay in touch, I have my podcast, Resonance Astrology, YouTube and Spotify, and I'm also on Instagram under Resonance Astrology, and that's about it. Everything else is linked down below. I have a website. You can contact me for readings, and thank you so much for sticking around. I wish you a beautiful day. Goodbye.